the fact that we started out with these 3 different levels, these 3 different terms, even if people want to debate us on what the terms are, like, is the point, right? That this, for it to work, there has to be a zoom out and zoom in and something in between. Because when you're only looking at it from one perspective, it's probably not enough.
Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to exploring authenticity in the workplace and discovering how to navigate it your way. I'm your host, Sandhya Sudhakar, and today we have a special episode. As we're nearing the end of the year, we often take some time out to reflect on the past year and plan for the new one. And in this episode, I have a close friend and fellow entrepreneur joining me. Her name is Virginia Martinez, and she is an organizational designer with a background in talent strategy and human-centered design. And in today's episode, we are talking all about how to set some goals or intentions for your year, some things that you might want to consider so that you can make these goals or intentions more meaningful to you, and some tips to ensure that you're able to stay on track toward the things that you really want. Now, we each share some of our own New Year traditions, and we dive into an example from my life where the intention that I set for 2024 didn't exactly pan out the way that I thought it would. I hope you could take away a lot of insight and some inspiration to make 2025 an amazing year for you. Okay, welcome to Working Your Way, Virginia. I'm excited to finally have you on.
I am not only excited, I'm flattered, as you know, that you even asked me. But I am so excited to be here. I've been watching your success with the podcast and been very proud of you. And so it's a big deal for me.
Oh, thank you. And that's like kind of crazy because we have these conversations like, I don't know, once a week at least. So it just happens to be
Mhm.
recorded this time.
This time. Yeah. I will sometimes wonder, like, what would happen if we took all of our texts and our voice notes to each other and, like, could we turn that into something? I don't know.
Yeah. So what we're actually here to talk about today
Yes.
is planning for the new year. And I don't know, there's like so much talk about New Year's resolutions, or how do you want to set your year up, or what do you want to accomplish this year? And I think, like most topics, it's pretty nuanced. And I just wanted to bring on a friend who has an equally divided mind between strategy and spirituality, and talk about, like, okay, what are some ways to set yourself up for the new year? How do you want to set yourself up? What are some tools and practices and some things that we can share?
I mean, not to just derail this podcast from the beginning, but yes, we're doing this because the new year is upon us, and it is a time where we start thinking about how we want to, like, set intentions or resolutions. But I would say, like, it doesn't have to be January 1st, right? And then you and I both agree on this. It could be
Yeah.
in general. When is a moment where you want to set intentions? Now, it just so happens that socially we are sort of nudged to do it at the turn of this calendar page. The thing that I often dislike about that, for whatever reason, is that, like, not all goals or intentions are going to be completed within 12 months, right? And so
Mm.
we already are setting this weird arbitrary box around it anyway. But yes, I think it is what planning, looking forward, setting intention, making commitments, all good stuff. And it's, so if you are listening to this at the end of the year or the start of the year, great. This is for you.
Exactly. And you can listen to it in July if you want to and set a 3-month goal. That's
Totally.
okay too.
It could be your birthday. It could be your solar return, your birthday.
Yes, I love that. I know I was gonna say we could start the year when Aries season starts, because that's really when the year starts, but that's fine. That's
Exactly.
neither here nor there.
Exactly.
So I did look up, this is my new favorite thing to do when I don't want to Google something and I want, or I would take 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour to Google it and go down a rabbit hole. I just ask Chat GPT. And so I was like asking Chat GPT, what are the origins of like New Year's resolutions? And it took me like all the way back to like ancient Babylon. So I was like, we're not doing this. But I
Hmm.
will say, from that, I learned there are some ancient roots in setting New Year intentions. There are also like a lot of cultural traditions in many cultures around the world. And then there's this kind of idea of like self-help culture, right? Which is where I think like New Year's resolutions, like in air
Mm,
quotes, came from, where it was just really this I'm going to set a resolution. I'm going to make a decision about a new behavior that I want to
sure.
demonstrate this year to make me better in some way.
Yes. I really want to hear about like the ancient and different cultural things because I suspect maybe it's something around the equinoxes or harvests or like yada yada yada. But yes,
Yeah.
self-help culture basically that we are being told there's something wrong with you and you have to now buy into a solution. So you have to buy a gym membership. You have to buy this. You have to, I mean, I didn't come here to complain about consumerism or capitalism, but I do think that's why you and I have this like really divided feeling on this. It's like we see the benefit and we also had this like little cringy moment of, eye rolling when someone's on my New Year resolution, right? And at the same time, we see how important it could be.
Yeah, totally. So I did want to break down, what does setting an intention look like versus maybe setting a goal? And I think making a resolution sits somewhere in the middle of those two things. So if we kind
Mhm.
of think about it on a spectrum, an intention focuses on kind of like your mindset or how you want to show up or how you want to approach life. And it's something kind of broad, like I set an intention in a word of the year this past year, and it was consistency. And we can talk later about how, like, I didn't really do that at all. But the idea was, I was like, how do I want my year to feel? I want things to
Mhm.
feel more consistent, more predictable, more structured, more routine. And that's what I actually really wanted for my year. Now, did I set any goals or specific metrics or like activities or actions behind that? No. So that could also be a piece of why that didn't work. But an intention really is this big, broad kind of mindset or approach. And then a goal is
Right.
kind of on the other end of that spectrum of, okay, this is specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's relevant and timely, right? That's the SMART model. And so
Mhm.
oftentimes goals are going to have those like concrete steps and actions that we're going to take to get there. And so I think this spectrum is interesting and maybe a resolution sits somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, as you and I were chatting about, uh, doing this topic for the podcast, what just came to me all the time was this isn't all that different than when I'm working with clients and they wanna set a vision, a strategy, and tactics, right? And
Yeah.
similarly, like, what's the purpose? What's our vision? Okay, that's closer to what an intention is. The goals are the tactics, right? Or maybe sort of short-term outcomes or things like that. But that resolution really is the strategy where you are deciding what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, to me, like I saw a lot of parallels in like how I talk to teams and organizations, and now I might talk to myself or someone else who's thinking about setting intentions.
Yeah, totally. And so, like, the idea here that I'm hearing is like, this works, right? This is a way, if we set this intention and then we have the tactics behind it to achieve something, like, it's going to work. Businesses do it all the time, every year or every, quarter, and we can do it in our lives too. So, I'd love to kind of pick up on what you mentioned there about like setting that long term thing and then having the things to back it up. Like, if somebody's considering this is something I want to do in this year, or this is a goal I want to set, what are some of the things they should like consider? What works, what doesn't?
Yeah, I'll tell you what doesn't work, and I think it's what you sort of were alluding to, is that sometimes these terms, intention, resolution, or goal, are all sort of used interchangeably, and you and I can sit here and wordsmith or parse it out and debate as to what is what, but I think what doesn't work is when people are sort of doing either one and not all, and what I mean by that is, as humans, we love to talk about the what and don't always specify the why or the how.
Mhm.
Or we get very specific, but we don't tie it, we don't zoom out, or we stay very high level and don't get into the details. So I think that the fact that we started out with these 3 different levels, these 3 different terms, even if people want to debate us on what the terms are, like, is the point, right? That this for it to work, there has to be a zoom out and zoom in and something in between. Because when you're only looking at it from one perspective, it's probably not enough. It's probably not gonna
Yeah.
work on just that, right?
Yeah, totally. I just had a conversation on a podcast recording that's not out yet when we're recording this, but will be out when it's published with somebody who runs a financial planning agency or organization.
Mhm.
And she was talking a lot about like setting a financial goal without any context doesn't work, right? If
Right.
you say I want to save $5 million or have $5 million saved by the time I retire, like to what end? Why? What are you going to
Yeah.
spend it on? Right. And then what does it mean for you now and the choices that you're going to have to make? And so
Right.
the idea of just having a goal without the context of why is super critical.
Yeah. I think a lot about, you and I dabble in the woo, but, you can't just throw something out into the universe and be like and hope it just manifests, "Oh, here comes the full moon, and now
Yeah.
the words I spoke 2 weeks ago are" no, that's not how this works, right? But when you do have an intention or like a direction, a North Star you wanna head in, like, I think what is also really important is to ask yourself, like, what would have to be true, right? Because then we love it in theory, but in practice is where things fall apart. And so, what would actually have to be true for me to achieve this or to feel this or to whatever move in this direction, whatever it may be? And then, what within those things are within your control? And I think the place where folks really kind of get stuck or feel defeated when they look back and they're like, "Oh, I didn't meet my intention, I didn't meet my resolution or what or goal or what have you," is because they didn't think about, like what you were just saying, the trade-offs. What does this mean for me, right?
Mhm.
I am saying essentially with this setting this intention that this is something important to me. I am saying that this is something I'm going to prioritize. And that means saying yes to certain things and no. So what are the trade-offs? And you have to have that conversation with yourself because then, for example, like we can say, speaking of self-help, oh, I'm going to lose weight. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to join the gym. And great, like everyone does that. We get it. But then what are the trade-offs? Like, oh, well, that means that I'm probably not going to be able to spend on XYZ because now I'm spending on this. Or if I commit to meal planning, that means I'm gonna have to say no to when I'm invited to brunch on Sunday. Like, the thing is, if you don't think about those types of things in advance, when it comes up, you're not gonna say no to brunch. Like, you know? And
Right.
then you're gonna do mental gymnastics to sort of rationalize why, like, well, it's okay because I have been meal planning and I have been prepping and I anyway, point being, I hate that I chose that one as an example, but it's, like, so cliché. But we don't think about what would have to be true and what is that actually asking of us as in terms of trade-offs.
Yeah, it's so true, and I'm thinking about my own example, right? When you started talking about that, I was like, "Are you coaching me?" But I know you weren't. But, like, I really wanted some structure and routine this year, and I wanted to streamline it was kind of like this minimalist mindset where I was like, "I wanna do a couple things, and I wanna do them over and over and do them really well, like, in my business, and I wanna kind of have this better like structure to my day because when you work for yourself it's like every single day can be totally different if you want it to be and what I think I encountered throughout the year was like I actually needed a little bit of that going with the flow like when life would happen I did actually really have these like wild swings in where my attention was needed this year whether it was like my own health whether it was my family stuff whether it was investments I'm making in my own education and things I want to do in the future and like it wasn't this kind of formulaic year where like I can get up, I can do
Right.
client work on these days, I can do this on these days, and I can spend this day outdoors, right? It was like in big chunks of what was going on in my life. And so I don't know if that means consistency maybe isn't realistic, but at this phase of my business or in this place in my life, it maybe isn't. And
Mhm.
I think that's okay.
I do think it's okay, and I'm not coaching you. However, I'd be curious to say, like, why was it so important to you to have a routine? What would that sort of fulfill for you, right? Like there's probably like it just says like a
Yeah.
one tick above. And maybe it's because you value stability, or maybe because I don't know if this is true or not, but maybe to you feeling like it's routine, you're like, okay, now I'm like grooving. I'm in a groove with my business. It's not like, what will tomorrow bring, which is not fun, right? You feel established. Maybe there's
Right.
something about feeling like this is real and it's safe and I'm moving in the right direction. And then it's like, okay, well, is consistency the thing? Right, because maybe the intention is there. I wanna finish the next year feeling like I've made really good progress, I've made the right decision, and I am stable. I don't know.
You're 100% right. And literally as you were saying that, like, what is the thing that you wanted from consistency, right? I mean, it's a demonstration of even what you were talking about with like manifestation, right? There's this idea that like manifestation is just throwing an idea out into the universe. And it's actually not when you look at like, whatever the science behind it, or even experts in manifestation, they talk about like, okay, if you say you want this thing, why do you want that thing? Like, really, what's at the root of it? Because maybe it's
Mhm.
not the specific thing that you want. Maybe there are 10 different ways that you could actually get the underlying, more important thing. Right. And so
Right.
it's like, okay, if I say I want to date somebody that's 6 feet tall, is it really about them being 6 feet tall, or is it about like how someone who is a certain stature physically will make me feel? And is 6 feet tall the only way to get that feeling? No. And so don't tell Shereen I said that, but our our mutual friend that tells me like I can't get everything I want in a life partner. So but
And then you're like, "I'm not asking for a lot. I'm asking for," and then here comes like a list of you're like, "Oh."
right, right, tall, emotionally intelligent, like it's not a lot. It's not a lot. But anyway, the thing that I that did the word that came up for me when you were talking about that with my word of the year of consistency was stability. And you said it like immediately after it came to my mind. And the prior year, my word of the year for 2023 was visibility. And
Mm.
I said yes to every opportunity. I said yes to so many things. And I spoke on different stages, and I would like scramble to put the things together, right, to meet the moment, meet these opportunities. And it was great. It happened. And then I think because of that year, what I then was kind of feeling was like, I need this dramatic like
Mhm.
realignment,
Mhm.
right? I need my like sense of predictability back
Mhm.
and that stability. And I want to feel like I know what's coming around the corner. And so I thought if I have consistent actions, that's going to happen. And right, wrong, or indifferent, right? I think it was about something that I hadn't been getting the year before.
I mean, having also been in those modes where you say yes to everything and figure it out later, it's a lot of hustling and you're changing gears and modes from one meeting to the next. And it's you kind of run on adrenaline for a while,
Yeah.
but there are days where it really energizes you and there are days or weeks where it really drains you. And so I can imagine that happens too. But even if you're like, okay, I'm going to slow down, there's a wake, like there's the wake effect, like the waves that are still rippling out from you saying yes to a bunch of things 3, 6 months earlier. So even if you, I
Totally.
bet you, if you wanted to shift some things in that new year, you were still feeling the ripple effects of your, your hustle year, your,
Yeah.
which is good, right? And if we were to rewrite this together, because I have similar I don't wanna say challenges, but sort of scenarios that I go through similar to you, and it's like, okay, well, what's the right, like, balance for my energy on the whole? I'm gonna have insane weeks or months or quarters, I might not. How do I want my energy to feel at the end of the day or the end of the year?
Yeah.
And I don't know. What's interesting too is that we sometimes assume that an intention has to be like, oh, like the answer, like, I'm going to feel XYZ, where the intention is like, this year I'm going to explore and find out what's the right level of energy, right? Like that in itself is an intention as well. Like we don't ever tell ourselves that like sometimes figuring it out, being willing to say like this year's all about experimenting because I don't have the answer, that in itself is an intention.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's like the right kind of intention. If you're going to set an intention without having the goal framework behind it of like what
Right.
actions are you going to take, the strategies and the tactics, right? I think it should be this is what I want to experiment with, explore, learn,
Hmm.
experience, right? I think that totally makes sense.
And what comes with that too is like, I think you and I are wired similarly is when I started my own business as well, I said something like that to myself. But I also know I don't like failure. Guess what? And experimentation, although it is, I truly believe that prototyping things and experimenting is a way to mitigate risk on a larger scale. I really do believe that. But at the same time, like you have to be prepared that, like, oh, yeah, I tried it this way and that didn't work. Right. And so
Yeah.
I had to also say, like, okay, that is my intention, which means it is asking of me not to consider myself a failure or whatever when the experiment doesn't work out and just treat it as a learning. Right. And so that's sort of both like a micro and macro moment of how we sometimes look at these intentions and goals and resolutions is that we're very quick to be like binary, like we succeeded or we didn't
Hmm.
versus like progress, not again, not to be so cliche, like put progress over perfection, but we rarely think about our intentions as like it could have stages. You can be
Yeah.
in progress.
Yeah. And I think if I had really thought about it, I think to your point that you made at the beginning, I think consistency is still a great intention
Mhm.
for me in the context of taking consistent actions will help me feel a bit more of a sense of foundation, right? A bit more sense of stability, like in my life or my business or whatever. And that's not a 12-year endeavor or a 12-month endeavor. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think that I could build a consistent business in 12 months. I don't
Mhm.
know that anyone can in 1 year, in,
Mhm.
the first couple of years of doing this. So,
Was there something that like now that you're looking back, was there parts of your business or the activities that you're like, okay, if I were to make this bite size, if there was one thing that became more consistent, this is what I would want it to be. And
yeah.
I don't know, for me, it's like proposal writing. I don't, well, no surprise. I like think I'm starting with a blank canvas every time, but something like that. Is there something very
Yeah.
tangible, actionable bite size that you're like, if I actually could wrap up this next year, being more consistent about how I do this thing in my business, it would help alleviate all the.
Yeah, and honestly, if I think about it in that context, that did happen because the more I did Enneagram sessions with teams, the more these like 3 or 4 or 5 kind of modules or like subject areas bubbled up. And so
Mhm.
actually ending this year, I know if someone comes to me and they say they have this problem on their team, like I'm going to recommend we do this topic, applying the Enneagram types to communication or applying the
Mhm.
Enneagram types to recognizing your triggers and understanding how you show up when you're triggered, right? And there's all these different kind of like things. And so, thank you. I actually did build quite a bit of consistency in one part of my business, and I think I could take credit for that.
For sure. And I was gonna say too that that's a form of consistency that also contributes towards your expertise and credibility, right?
Yeah.
There are moments where something is customized and you are recreating the wheel for someone. But most of the time people are coming to you because you have a point of view. And so the fact that you did that throughout the year and you got to a place where like, okay, I feel very confident recommending X, Y, and Z based on my experience. Like chef's kiss. That's amazing. That is a form of consistency, right? That is related to trust and credibility and confidence. And so I love
Yeah.
that for you.
Yeah, I love that for me too. And I want to touch back on something that you said about if I'm going to embrace the spirit of experimentation, I'm going to also have to recognize that I will feel like I have failed sometimes. And it makes me think
Mhm.
of this like something that's talked about a lot in behavior change or change theory in general is like confronting parts of our identity that we maybe feel attached to. And
Oh,
because we're wired similarly, fear of rejection and fear of failure are like death, you know? And so it makes me think about this coaching framework. And I use this with one on one clients anytime we start an engagement. And it's this kind of like thing that is part of like the quote unquote contracting phase of working with a client is like understanding what their goals are, right? Like structuring the engagement, how much time do we need to get you to where you want to go. And it's this goal setting framework of asking, okay, what are your goals? And then inquiring, like, why are they important to you? Why is that important to you? To get to the root of, again, is this the thing? Or do you think this is the only way to accomplish what's really at the root? But then there are these other kind of pieces of it that are how will we know when we get there, right? How will you
mhm,
measure it? Even what's the feeling? How are you going to be thinking,
mhm,
feeling, acting differently
mhm,
when we've gotten to the goal? And then, like, what else have you tried before? And what's going to get in the way?
mhm,
And really going through that process of like understanding those things that what's going to get in the way oftentimes can be this kind of like emotional block or if I really want to experiment with all these different things, I am going to encounter the feeling of failure. I'm going to have to encounter these emotions. And so
100%,
I
yeah.
love the kind of 5 question, you know, interrogating your goals in a way that, like, helps you really
Yeah,
get to, like, what is it you're trying to accomplish?
yeah. So I do something similar, except I do it sort of at the team or organizational level, right? And whether it's sort of related to theory of change or impact ladder, I mean, these are things that you can find on the internet. I did not make them up. They are tools used by lots of organizational designers. But similarly, I love what you were saying because there's like, okay, I often, if you ask a set of executives like, what's your purpose? And it's usually something about like whatever financial goal they want to hit. And I'm like, okay, I get it. Yeah, 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 yeah. Like that's your the desired business outcome. Great. We want that. That's important, right? I get it. And what like impact do you want to have? What do you want to be known for? Like sort of a little bit like take it up a notch, right? And then once you have sort of that big picture intention for whether it's the team or organization. This isn't the word you use, but it's a word that I use like basically to describe the same thing. Like, what are the signals that are going to tell
Mm.
us we're heading in that direction? Okay, great. Now put a pin in that because we'll come back and figure out how we're going to track and measure that, right? And so what's going to get in the way, right? Oftentimes is, I mean, I can tell you right now, spoiler alert, people are being asked to change. People People don't like that, right? That's why they call it organizational change or behavior change, like, it's not
Yeah.
easy, right? People treat change very differently. They interpret it as, like, "So are you saying the way I'm doing it is wrong, or are you saying I'm bad?" Right? When we are thinking about it on a personal level, like, "Oh, does that mean what I'm doing is bad or I'm what?" No. So it's hard, right? All that emotional stuff comes up. It comes up on Teams. And so I encourage folks to, like, get playful with it. It's like, okay, if you had to create like a before and after story, what's your from to? Right. And it's like, well, we're moving from, I'm making this up right now in the moment, being super reactive and saying yes to everything and spreading ourselves thin to being super strategic and whatever. Like, and so you write a couple of those statements, those before and afters, those from to statement, like, it just kind of playfully gives you that sort of framework to know, like, sort of where you wanna go, what it's gonna feel like, what's gonna have to shift, and you're like, "Okay," and this is again where you're like, "What are the trade-offs?" Like, I'll be like, "Okay, let's write some even over statements," right? Because you can say, "We're gonna prioritize growth." Okay, well, sometimes prioritizing growth and profit side by side conflict, right? Because like, sometimes it takes capital to grow. Anyway, I'm not here to explain business, but point being, you have to sort of
Yeah.
get to the point of like, well, if we said that to achieve this vision, this purpose, these outcomes, we're going to have to prioritize X. That means we're going to prioritize it even when we have to trade off this other really good thing that we like, that we want. We hope we don't have to trade it off all the time, but we need to be prepared. So growth over profit, progress over perfection, you get it, right?
Yeah.
Those, just like I would tell a team or organization, publish those, write those down, make them visible, make them shared. Don't write 20 of them, write like 3 good ones. Do that for yourself as well. Put it on a Post-it, put it on your laptop. Like, I don't care what, but something to remind you, because when it's time to make that tough decision, you need a sense of permission to go
Mm-hmm.
against what feels right, to change yourself. Like, you need that sense of permission to be like, no, it's okay. We said we weren't going to do this thing, right?
Yep.
Those are the types of things that I think about when whether it's a team or individual, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, the whole theme of, I feel like what you shared is like, how do you get being pragmatic, right? Being realistic about what you're saying you want to accomplish, and having that transparency, and like, okay, if this is what we want, these are the trade-offs that we're gonna have, and putting it out on the table, like proactively seeing where your barriers and your tension
Mhm.
points are gonna be, and all of that kind of stuff. And it's similar to say, like, if you set a goal, what's gonna get in the way, right? And so I
Mhm.
I love that idea. And then the other part that I heard in what you said is like being realistic about where you're starting from also, because if we set a goal that doesn't take into account my current state,
Mhm.
then how do I know if it's achievable? How do we set a time frame for it? Like all of those
Mhm.
types of things too. So,
Mhm.
yeah. And it makes me think about how important reflection is in this whole process too, right? We're talking about setting goals or intentions or, New Year's resolutions that seem to be very forward looking, but I think the end of the year is like a really critical time too to be able to look back and say, okay, where did I come from? Where am I now? Like, what did I learn this year? What did I explore? What worked? What didn't?
Mhm. You just made me think of something too, like, sort of the difference between, like, an investment and an intervention. Like, if anyone's ever taken, like, Sales 101, they tell you that people like, you're gonna have a shorter sales cycle if someone needs an intervention, which implies something's broken, something's not working, I need to fix it,
Mhm.
and I can't wait. I needed it fixed yesterday, right? So there's urgency, there's motivation, there's something broken, versus an investment that's like, wouldn't it be nice in the future to have this thing? It's a nice to have, not must have. And so, for example, folks, like when people are like, "Oh, we're shrinking our budget a little bit around innovation." Why is that? Because innovation feels like a nice to have. Now, I can argue against that. That's a different podcast, but you can see like
Mhm.
people don't feel the same urgency, right? Versus other business needs. Or we're going to lower the amount we're spending on L&D because that's a nice app. Again, another podcast where I could argue that tremendously, but people don't see it as this and are not willing to make that investment. And so, similar to like how we're setting intentions, like I think sometimes we enter the year, especially these like very, I don't want to use cliche in a bad way, but the sort of New Year's resolutions that we hear a lot about are born out of the things that we feel are broken in us or broken in our lives. And okay, that could be a good catalyst for change, for sure. I would just love it if we were like, okay, there's no urgency around this, but gosh, if I could invest in myself, what would this year's intention be, right? What is
Yeah.
maybe that nice to have, but actually might turn out to be a must have? Like, I don't know. Like, I would love to reframe it because I just think entering, whether it's the year or a new stage, with like the intention is actually just a slightly reworded statement about what you don't like about yourself is just a yucky place to start. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's so true. And it's so funny because I'm sitting here thinking, like, my desire for consistency was based on what was broken in my life at that point. Not necessarily broken in me, right?
Right.
And so, like, it's a little different, but it was like, yeah, I was everywhere. in 2023. And I just wanted to kind of like rein that back in. And yet the things that I committed to, and I would not take any of them back because they were things that were really important to me and are important to me. And that I'm happy that I'm doing are requiring like a lot of inner exploration and a lot of like bringing back up difficult things from my past and my childhood, and it's for all good purposes. And like if I had been kind of pragmatic about what have I signed up for in my year, and is this going to be something that supports consistency? Probably not. Like, let me rethink my
Right.
goal. Like, what was I looking for?
Yeah.
And how can I realistically achieve it this year? I think it's a very different conversation. So this is funny. It's great because it's like, as a coach, I'm like excellent at doing this stuff for other people. And, it's
Yeah.
like, and it's hard to do it for ourselves.
Yeah. No, oh, for sure. And I think especially, you and I both started our own businesses around the same time. And I think I shared with you too that when in some ways, for better or worse, when you're working within an organization or a team, the milestones are set out before you, right? You kind of know, like, okay, the next title is this, the next promotion is that. Like, you you kind of have the guideposts or guardrails or milestones sort of laid out. And so you can
Yeah.
decide, like, okay, that's not the milestone I want. I'm going to go somewhere else or I'm going to go after it or whatever. But when you are your own boss, I was actually really worried about this too, because we talk about sort of how do you know you're moving in the right direction, or how do you know that you're trending towards your intention or your goal? Like, you now have to set up your own make believe milestones or guideposts
Yeah.
or signals of success. And I'm a big proponent, like, it can't just be dollar amount. Yeah, sure, that is
Right.
one metric. Should not be the only metric, right?
Right.
I love that, one metric could be, I feel consistency in the sense of predictability that I know I'll always be able to take 2 weeks off during this month. I don't know. Like, that's a great
Yeah.
metric. Like, that's very specific and measurable. And like, that was one for me. I was like, well, I think, okay, if being my own boss, what would success look like? If I can say, like, I don't work most Fridays and I'm done with meetings usually around 2, that's a win, right?
Yeah.
I think you get my point is, like, you sometimes you're in a position where either the milestones and metrics have always been put forward for you, and maybe they're not fit for purpose. Maybe they're not what you need.
Yeah. And it's funny. Like this year, I did choose growth, like deep personal growth over business growth, and that maybe in hindsight, it seems obvious and clear, right? And it wasn't something that I like identified at the beginning of the year. So that's great. I want to talk about some of our favorite practices
For
around the
sure.
end of the year. And I mentioned doing this word of the year, and I've done it the last couple of years. But I have this tradition where I have a group of girlfriends, whoever's around and available. I probably invite, 20 people, and like half of them are in town and available. But on the eve of the eve, so like the day before New Year's Eve, I will do like a party. The first year we went to this place that has like champagne and caviar, and we like got a big table reservation. I've hosted it at my house before, and I like had to find this little book. If you're on video, you can see, but I like make this little printout book, and it's got like three standouts from this past year. Maybe their events or moments or meaningful things, one thing you're proud of, one thing you learned. And then going forward, it's like, what's your word of the year and how would you apply it in like, this is like a little wheel of life kind of thing. So it's like in
Mhm.
different areas of your life. So this was my 2023 one because I couldn't find my 2024 one, but my word was visibility. And I said, how will I be more visible in my career, in my finances, in my love life, in my, health or whatever? And so, like, how would that word apply to each of these areas?
Mhm.
And then some actions that I would take to do that. And so, like, I make these little books for this party, and we just have like a lovely day or evening. And it's been like something really fun to do. We made vision boards this past year, little mini vision boards. And so that's like become a tradition now. And I have some of my local friends like ask me, they're like, are you going to do the party again this year? And I'm like, I think I have to, because now it's like a thing, And so people look
Yeah.
forward to it. And I just love it.
Do you find that, and especially because you've done it now, it sounds like with like the same folks a few times, that you check in on it, you reference it, you keep each other accountable. Like you say, like, how's visibility going? Like, I have to imagine that the sort of shared experience, the ritual nature of that also makes you feel like you're not alone in these
Yeah.
endeavors. Maybe some, like, you get an accountability buddy, but you probably feel like someone's rooting you on, right? When you do something like this. So I love the idea
Yeah.
of doing it in a group, and the ritual aspect of it is super cool that it
Yeah.
happens always the eve of the eve. It's cool.
Yeah, and now that we've done it for a couple of years, people can, like, report back, like, "Oh, this
Mhm.
happened this year. This was something that I, like, set an intention around, and, like, I did it." And so we get to celebrate too, which is
For
cool.
sure.
A friend of mine just sent, it was like a reel or something on Instagram, but it was, a group of girlfriends that got together, and they each took a bottle of wine, and they wrote their goal or the thing that they wanted. Like, one of them was like, having a book publication date. And they stored all of these bottles of wine, and they would open them and drink them together whenever anybody would hit any of those milestones that they
Oh,
wrote.
that's so fun.
Yeah.
Oh my
Which
gosh.
I was like,
Yeah.
that's an amazing thing, because then you get to come back together and celebrate, right? And it's always there. It's always like
Love it.
available.
Love it. I would intentionally get a wine that needs to age like 10 years to something, like, give me time to complete whatever, like, "Oh, don't open it just yet."
And then you over deliver, and it's a lose-lose situation. Now you're drinking your
Oh,
wine before it's
we'll
ready.
see. We'll see. I still haven't figured out quite my intentions for this year, but, yeah, we'll see, we'll see.
Yeah.
But, what I love about something like a vision board, one, some folks are visual or what have you. Yes, there's that. It can be fun. It can be creative. It's playful. We seldom have moments of play and sort of mindless cutting
Mhm.
or drawing, which is actually like frees your mind up and, like, lets creative juices flow. And like most of these things, it doesn't really matter what you cut out or what you paste on there, what it looks like, because this is all a mechanism, a tool to facilitate conversation. So it doesn't matter what you cut out and glued or where you glued it. But when someone's like, hey, tell me about why you put that word, now you're like opening up and sharing. So it's like facilitating a conversation. It's a way to get those thoughts that are kind of swirly inside of you out and articulated and clarified. Maybe you're workshopping it with someone. So I really do enjoy an activity like that because of the questions and conversations and articulation and clarification that comes out of it. And I think people usually leave, even if they never look at their little, collage again, there's something that like really set them up for success, like after that exercise.
Yeah.
Another thing that I do, well, like, speaking of nerd, I subject my children to all of my ridiculous tricks. We have tons of poses and Sharpies around the house. So one thing that we do is we have a jar, and at the end of every week, we write down on Post-its with Sharpies, like, some of our favorite moments. Sometimes, like, it was a awesome week and, the kids are writing down multiple things. We put it in, blah, blah, blah. Then at the end of the year, we dump out. And does it take time? Of course. But we're like, "Oh, we totally forgot about that," And so we go
That's sweet.
through all of, like, sort of the highlights of the year, and then we're like, "Okay, so, like, what's really important to us? Like, what's gonna be really important?" Basically, we do a retro. They don't know that, but I facilitate a retro with my family where it's like, "Okay, what went well? What would we like to do differently? What do we wanna stop doing? What do we need to start doing?" Like, we do all that, and we set, like, sort of family intentions as well.
First of all, I love the idea of, like, writing down something that, like, made you happy, that you're proud of, or whatever, each week, and being able to go back and reflect on those. It's like so much happens in a year that, like, thinking back for me, I'm like, I feel like January of 2024 feels like a decade ago, but also, like, a lot of life happened for me in this year. And so
Mhm.
I think we have those years where it's like, ooh, man, I would kind of wish I would have been keeping track of that, or, even whatever was going on. But the way that you're talking about too, of like using that reflection to say, like, what was important? Like, what do we want to do more of? What do we want to stop doing? Right. Kind of like your start, stop, continue idea, or even just kind of reflecting on like what worked last year. And then there are probably lots of like woo woo things
Mhm.
that are
Oh,
part of
yeah.
our traditions. What do you like
Oh,
to
I get
do?
woo. I get woo sometimes, yeah. It does coincide with, like, end of year, start of year. So I do meet with, an astrologer. It's been via Zoom for the I just kinda started over Zoom during the pandemic. I stayed over Zoom once a year, and, typically it's in December, but if I can't get or, whatever, Q4, but at least early January, and, sometimes I go in with, like, "Hey, I'm really curious about what's gonna be happening sort of in terms of career or yada yada," but sometimes I'm like, "Hey, just tell me what, like, transits are coming up that I should be paying attention to." I like that too because like, I'm usually surprised and learn stuff about astrology that I wouldn't have known because they're explaining things to me that I didn't know. So it's just really cool.
Yeah.
I love it, but I also just again, it facilitates a conversation. They're like reflection prompts, like I'm not saying this is the solution and now the astrologer has given me a blueprint or predicted my future. Like that's
Right.
not the point, nor is it that's how it works. Just like any other framework with like its own language, it gives you a way to like bucket information and sort it and reflection prompts. So I like that. Um then I did another really woo thing I did, was I had this woman told me that, like, she had met with a medium. I had never done that, that she's,
Mm.
like, a medium, but also does, like, intuitive energy readings. I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm intrigued." And it was right before I knew I was gonna start a business. I was, like, gonna start it, let's say technically it was March 2021, but, like, the LLC was filed on January 1st, 2021. And so I met with her in December and, like, gave her no just like, I'm just curious about my career. She didn't know that I was leaving my job. She didn't know that I was starting a company. And that was really cool because I don't know. I leave myself open to that. Like I don't know. Other than the cost, like what's the harm? Like you just
Yeah.
really the sort of stuff she was saying was really deep and intuitive, which you would imagine. And she didn't know me. She didn't know me, and she predicted some things that came true. And yeah, it was cool.
Yeah. I also think like, whatever anyone believes, it's like we also hear like what we need to hear in certain moments
Oh,
too, where
yes. 100%.
to your point, you don't have to subscribe to some specific kind of methodology or a certain set of beliefs, but like really it's about what does it make you question? What does it make you ponder? What does it make you maybe like reframe or think about differently to have
Mhm.
some questions posed to you? So I think that's really cool.
For sure. I love when people get, like, so up in arms about, like, "Oh, astrology this, and it's BS," and it's like, "Okay, like, are you the same person that, swears that they're Gryffindor and not Hufflepuff? Like, chill out." Like, like, calm
Yeah.
down, everybody. Or like, "Oh, astrology is like such garbage. It's like, how are like the arrangement of different planets affecting this and that?" I'm like, aren't you the person that obsesses over fantasy football where make believe it's a make believe team with people who aren't actually playing together are interacting? Like, stop. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
let people have some fun. Like, geez, like, shut up. Like,
Right, like, you believe that not washing your jersey is gonna make your team win, but you think that the moon's phase is crazy.
right.
Like, hmm.
I don't know. I mean, just let people as long as you are being kind to yourself and others and you're not causing harm to yourself or others, like, who cares?
I am curious. So, we're for transparency recording this like a couple of months before the end of the year, so we're maybe not quite in the mode yet, but as we get closer to the new year, I'm curious, like, where are you? What's on your mind? I know you said you aren't like ready to set any intentions for the year, but where are you right now?
Well, I knew you were gonna ask me this. I knew you were gonna ask me this, so that's when I realized I wasn't ready, but I did give it some thought, and it's not really well formed, but I do think there's something about, like, your point about visibility and putting myself out there. I still need to do the process of, like, why and how and what's it gonna look like.
Mm,
But I do want, again, not to borrow all of your words of the year, but also want a little bit more predictability through work. I think, I'm very happy. I think it's I love what I do. I love the projects, but at the same time, I'm like, the economy shifts. It's like, oh shoot, people aren't gonna just want to hire consultants right away. Like, and I knew that.
right.
I don't think what I need to build an intention around is sort of navigating it, but rather like being proactive, not being like, oh, I guess it was a quiet September. Like, I kind of need more proactive practices around that. And I think the
Yeah.
reason why it's an intention now, which you would assume, is because actually, like, I'm very lucky that the first year I launched, I was super busy, and I just kind of was like, "Wow, this is cool," like, people are giving me referrals, and I'm doing all this work, and then, like, so I do have to be really intentional about it now, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not fully formed, but those are sort of the, like, loose things that I'll put together at some point to form some intentions and goals.
Yeah. And I think for me, when I chose visibility in 2023, it was like in my career area, it was like literal visibility. I was like, I want to be on stages. I want to speak more. I want to like, do these things. Right. And so it was really about like public speaking and that required me to like be out there in a lot of ways. But I also think visibility can be a conduit to predictability. Like it's a different kind of
Mhm.
visibility, right? Like you're not saying you want to speak on 20
Mhm.
stages. You're saying if people know what I do more clearly, more people know what I do and they can articulate it and they can recognize when they need it. That can bring predictability from at least an income and workload standpoint and things like that.
For sure. And, I'm just putting this off because when I get to the point where I have that conversation, that even over strategy conversation with myself, or what gets in the way and the trade-offs I'm going to have to make,
Yeah.
I am dreading having that conversation with myself, or, that reflection with myself, because I know that I do not want to go post on LinkedIn. I don't like creating social media, but, like, and, like, I kinda,
Yeah.
again, I know what I need to do, but I have to kinda come to terms with, like, you can't just put an intention out there and cross your fingers and hope for the best if I'm not willing to change or act differently, right? And so that's the part that I really need to get clear on before I really put it down on paper.
Yeah, and I will be the first to say social media is not the only way to be visible, to connect with people, to show them what you do? So it's like, I think there's a lot of flexibility there.
Great. Great. Please tell me.
We'll have another chat about that.
Yeah, because if I have to then commit to writing, I don't know how many posts on LinkedIn that start with, "I'm excited to announce. I am so proud to announce. I am
Yeah.
excited to share." I will not like myself. I'm sorry. I know I tell people to do that. I actually coach people to do this because it's important, but
Right.
it's so hard for me. So yeah. So if you have a way, please tell me.
Okay, we'll brainstorm. You'll be the first to hear. I think for my year, I wrote the question and I told you that I was going to ask you the question. And then I was like, I didn't really think about it. I think joy is a word that comes to mind and having more just
Mhm.
like moments of happiness, prioritizing that. I feel like my life can be very serious sometimes. And
Mhm.
so, like, how can I maybe prioritize joy? And I think the other thing is like, and I talk about this a lot with my clients, right? Again, it's like, great, do as I say, not as I do, but like focusing on things that will give me energy, which
Mhm.
could be like going to bed earlier or, making healthy meals, or it could be, things that I enjoy doing work-wise. And so I think that can be there's probably somewhere between those 2 or some combination of it is where I'm maybe gonna land for this year. So we'll see.
Yeah. I feel like that's related to joy too. I mean, something's telling me like the seriousness or sort of a little bit more lightness.
Yeah.
There's this, I think it's Brene Brown and someone else did like the guidepost for wholehearted living. Basically, if you want to cultivate this, you have to let go of that. And there's one I pulled it up because there's definitely one around like cultivating like gratitude and joy, and it says what you would need to let go of in that case is scarcity and fear.
Great. Super.
What does Brene Brown know?
Right. Like, why don't you tell me, as someone who has their own business, to let go of a scarcity mentality? That's so annoying.
Right, and then the other one, if you want you didn't really necessarily say play, but if you wanna cultivate play and rest, then what you need to let go of is exhaustion as a status symbol and productivity as self-worth, and this one, I this one resonates with me for sure.
Yeah, I think I've fully let go of exhaustion as a glory, like
Mhm,
busy, glorifying
mhm,
busy, all that kind of stuff. I'm pretty like over that stuff, but
mhm.
still connecting worth to like what you've gotten done. Like that's
Oh,
lifelong
yeah.
work for me.
Same,
Like
same.
forever, I will be working on that.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I've let go of sort of like the exhaustion as a status symbol, but yeah, productivity as self-worth, hard, hard.
Working on it.
Yeah.
I like those. What is it called again? We'll link it in the show notes.
The 10 Guideposts for Wholehearted Living, and it's
Okay.
from Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection. And there's a visual, like, a graphic that was illustrated by Andrea Pippins. Her name's on this, I did not know that off the top of my head, but cute. Look, a cute little it's like a flower, and then on both sides of the stem are different petals, and on one side of the petals are letting go of, and the other side cultivating.
Lovely. Well, I think I've aired all my dirty laundry as I like to do and given people, I think, a lot of things to consider, things to think about, things to incorporate into their own practices, and then some ideas for some practices, which was what we set out intending to do. So,
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much. It got me thinking about, yeah, all the stuff that I should be thinking about, sort of reflecting on this past year and looking forward. So, thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you for helping me diagnose some of my own intention setting. And I guess we can say happy 2025.
Happy 25.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed a little peek into what super nerdy conversations between my friends and I sound like. Y'all, this is my life. I truly love reflection and understanding human behavior. And I want to say a big thanks to Virginia for joining me in this conversation. There was a lot to ponder in this episode, but I have a few takeaways that I want to highlight. The first is every time you set a goal or intention, first ask yourself why you want it. And if any part of it is coming from shoulds or what you see in the outside world that you think you should do or should want, I want you to take a second look at that goal. The second is when you set the goal, ask yourself, what are you willing to let go of to go after it? At the end of the episode, Virginia mentioned the illustration showing the 10 guideposts for wholehearted living, which shows you the 10 guideposts and what you'd have to let go of to make that thing happen. The link for this will be in the show notes. But this point was a really big part of the discussion. If we want something, it will always require us to trade off, give up, or let go of something else. So, as you set goals, if you can't come up with anything that you're going to have to let go of, I think that that might be an indicator that maybe you have a little bit more reflection to do. Even if it's something good or positive that you're going after, it always requires something else to go away. Now, I didn't fully think through this when I set an intention to have more consistency, especially in my business in 2024. And I shared a lot during the episode about what I wasn't willing to give up and the moments that made it kind of unrealistic for that to be possible in this exact moment in my life. The third one is aim for progress, not perfection, and be open to changing your mind. Track how you're doing, bring along accountability buddies for support, and remember that if you get off track, recovery is really the most important thing. Get back on the track and try to minimize any self blame or shame that might come up. And then always be open to reevaluating that goal. Maybe it isn't the right one for you to set in the first place, or maybe your priorities have shifted. But you get to make adjustments and pivots throughout the year. And the last thing I'll share is that I shared about my end of the year party tradition. And while my little New Year's reflection booklet isn't available publicly for sale or otherwise, there is a website called Year Compass that has a really great booklet that is super comprehensive, and it gives you lots of prompts to reflect and to plan for the year ahead. I've mentioned it in this podcast before. Now, with a resource like this, I would also just say make it your own. Even if you fill out only a few pieces of it, it could be really helpful. Again, don't shoot for perfection. But maybe you could try to make it an event to go through it. Take yourself out to a nice lunch or on a coffee shop date and fill it out there, or make an evening of it, or take some inspiration from me and gather some friends to do it together.